Welcome back to all of our patrons and YouTube members and subscribe stars. This is your monthly exclusive episode of the podcast. I am joined, of course, by Kason remotely and by Keith again.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Always a
Thanks
pleasure to have you. Keith is joining us for this episode because he told me that NeverEnding Story was his favorite film of all time. I would like to hear more about that.
It jumped up for me.
Did it really?
Oh, it jumped. I don't think this is a world record, I think, in the amount of spaces that movie has jumped for me. There's a world record. No, I don't think anyone else has ever had this experience before.
It gets better as you get older. Yeah.
Well, I didn't understand the movie at all when I was a kid, actually, and I'm realizing that now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what movie I was watching, but it's not the movie that I just watched.
I want to hear from you, Keith, though, about what it is that makes this your favorite film. I haven't had a chance to ask you that yet.
Sure. So there was kind of like a lot of movies coming out around the same time. There was The Secret of Nim, The Last Unicorn, Labyrinth, Dark Crystal.
Labyrinth, that's right, yeah.
Of like, Watership Down, like children's movies that are also kind of like horrifically traumatic in their own ways.
Super dark.
But,
and
this might be like a weird thing to say, but it's almost like everyone I know who had this experience that kind of grew up around I'm 45 at the moment. But it was like everyone had that same sort of traumatizing experience, but also like was very thankful and appreciative and felt like it was formative for them in some way.
Yeah.
So that's what it applies in this movie. Like, is one of the top, maybe this in The Dark Crystal in another way, but basically it's one of those movies that when you're a kid, even though you don't understand all the subtext, it's like you just like feel the resonance that like something deep is going on here. And so I just like clued into that, I guess you could say, at a very young age. And there's a lot of particular scenes in this movie, not just the sad horse scene that we'll talk about later.
Yes.
That really just kind of like, haunted me in a way. We'll talk about them later, I'm sure. But that just some sort of deep subconscious thing. And then there's a moment in this movie, I want to save it for the end, but I'll pre-tease it, right? The end of this movie does something that is truly, in my opinion, like astonishing in the way it breaks the fourth wall in a way that I've never really seen before or since. And I think it's something that we might be on the cusp of seeing more of because of like new mixed media and transmedia and like the future of video games, honestly. Like this movie affected me. It literally spoke to me personally in a kind of shocking way. And I think that's just a presage of things about to be. And so I think, in my opinion, NeverEnding Story is like the first, like whatever the ARG acronym is, was an alternate reality game. In my opinion,
something like that.
NeverEnding Story actually begins that, even in the book, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the book a little bit for sure, but as I was watching this last night, rewatching it, I did think of you a little bit, Keith. We'll get more into detail about why, like what you were just touching on with the ending, but it actually reminded me a little bit of some of the stuff you said in our Xenosaga episode at the very end, where you were talking about how you became sort of like inspired to make these things like a reality in the real world, right? So I think I kind of know where you're going with a similar sentiment that this has, and so I thought of you while I was watching. I was like, oh, I think I'm seeing like I'm seeing Keith in this.
Interesting.
You're probably right.
Yeah. So why don't we start by just like briefly summarizing like what this movie is? So basically, it follows a boy named Bastian. His mother has recently passed away. He's the kind of kid who, as his father describes him, his head's in the clouds. He's a dreamer. He's not really interested in paying attention at school. He's more interested in
because they even mentioned like swim, like extracurricular. Like he's kind of just not. He's tuning out. He's not doing anything.
Yeah, and part of that, I'm sure, is the passing of his mother. Part of it is that he's just really into these worlds that he reads about. He's a big reader. He mentions he read Lord of the Rings and Tarzan and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
20,000.
Like all kinds of different books. And so he's a reader. He's a dreamer. and he just wants to spend time in those places. In the novel, they make a little bit more of an emphasis on his interest in storytelling, which they don't hit so much on in this movie, which is kind of cool, because it's kind of
very cool. It connects up later,
yeah, exactly. So we'll get into that a little bit, but anyway, he's got some bullies. Well, his dad talks to him and tries to get him to, come back down to earth, put your feet on the ground, stop dreaming so much, take responsibility for your life, face your problems. And he has some bullies that chase him, and he hides in a bookstore. And the owner of the bookstore sort of like baits him into taking this book, The NeverEnding Story.
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
Yeah, it was really well done. And so he goes and basically reads this book up in the attic of the school. He skips his classes. He's there basically like all day, and like I would guess well into the night reading this book. And he realizes as he's going through it that he has some sort of ability to connect to the story and sort of like affect what is happening in the story. And this scares him. It seems impossible. He doesn't want to believe it. But in the end, it is actually he who is the only one who can save the childlike empress and save this world of Fantasia that he's reading about. It's a story that is about not losing one's sense of imagination and creativity. It's encouraging people to not lose that sort of like childlike desire to keep dreaming big, and not losing that as you get older. I was surprised to get into the behind the scenes for this movie. I'm actually surprised I never did it before.
Yeah.
Until now.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in how they did some of that stuff.
How much of that did you guys do? Did you look into? None?
Other than just looking and being like, I know how they did that.
Yeah, a little bit in terms of like the stagecraft stuff, but I did read the book also back in the day, and I'm familiar with some of the, let's just say, mixed feelings that were behind the scenes in terms of how the movie turned out in relation to the original book and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's a very kind way of putting it. He hated the movie.
Oh, the guy, the director?
The author of the book despises the movie.
What message does the book have?
What's that?
What message does the book have?
It has similar messages, but there are a few sort of key differences. And I guess we can get into that a little more as we progress.
I've never read the book.
But
yeah, just to quickly summarize it, because I think most of it probably won't be germane actually this conversation, because this movie stays very squarely in the first half of the book.
Basically just the first half, yeah.
Yeah, but long story short, where I think one of the key messages of the movie and the first part of the book is what Mike was saying, which is, retain your childlike wonder and carry that into adulthood, and don't let the world beat it out of you. The second half of the book is interesting because it sort of tackles the opposite problem, where Bastian goes into Fantasia, or Fantastica as it's called, and sort of becomes the author of the world, and then kind of loses himself in the fantasy. So then the message almost flips to the opposite side, like fantasy and imagination is good, but don't destroy the real world because you're kind of delusional in the fantasy world. So Michael and the author was basically like, hey, without that part, you're missing the totality of my message.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny because it's like he had just not only did he skip class, right, just completely missed all of school, but he stayed out the entire night, and the police are probably searching for him, right? Like, these probably filed a missing persons report, like, my son never came home, what's going on, where is he, everything's confusing. He does still have to live at some point, but at the very end of this movie, it's like, oh, but what happened after this is a story for another time. Like, they didn't want to get into it at all in terms of he basically just upended the real world in order to fit into this fantasy world.
I mean, he quite literally goes into Fantasia. He leaves Earth and goes into this fantasy world and lives there. Now, in the movie, he goes there and sort of wishes it back. But then he comes back to the real world with Falkor. That was the big thing that Michael Anda was pissed that they did in the ending, right? Because in the novel, and this is, I hope it's not too much of a spoiler, but every time he makes a wish, he has to sacrifice a memory of his real life to make it come to pass.
Very interesting.
So he's literally losing himself in this fantasy world. Right, by sacrificing his memories and stuff. So, yeah, there's a whole second half to this story that they basically don't cover in the movie. And yeah, so the author was not happy that they made that choice where they were only going to focus on the first half.
Well, I get the author being not happy that his vision wasn't fully displayed. But at the end of that movie, while my mind was thinking, there's so many problems with this, this makes no sense, this can't work, like, he still needs to grow up and get a job at some point. Like, this isn't going to work. Like, this doesn't make sense. I also, at the same time, came away with the feeling of that was the right choice for this movie to address the future and to say, look, that's not what this movie's doing. This movie just presented you a very powerful message, and we're going to leave it at that and not undercut it. We're not going to let the real world undercut how powerful the message was, because it was very powerful.
I feel the same as you, Kason. So it's always like the right choice. Yeah, it's always sad when you kind of hear these stories, because you're like, man, I love the book and I want the author to be happy, but I also love what they did with the movie. So it's
I thought it was great. I thought it was brilliant.
I agree too. And this is, I was real torn when I learned about this, because, I'm an aspiring fantasy author, and I'm a person who cares a lot about when you're making an adaptation of a work, that even though you're aware that the new medium is not going to allow you to do everything the same, and you're going to have to make decisions where you cut or change things, that you should still first really, really work to boil down what this thing is at its core, and that cannot be sacrificed. And so on one part, I feel like it wasn't, because they're only focusing on the first half of the story. But there is a point to be made that without that second half, it's incomplete.
I agree. I felt that. But at the same time, the movie wrapped up so nicely. And I have to bring this up too. Because I was watching this movie and I was like, I remember none of this, right?
Yeah.
Until it got to the end and he was on Falcor. Okay, I remember the crying girl, and I was scared. Like, you mentioned the word haunting, Keith. That girl, you mentioned the young empress.
Yeah, the childlike empress.
Yes. She has haunted me ever since I first saw that movie. Basically my whole life.
We will get to that.
Okay, I was freaked out by her. And then I remember the wolf thing that was like very scary also.
Gamork.
And then I remembered the thing. And then I remember him riding Falcor and chasing his bullies down. And I have to say, that is the only part of the movie I actually understood. And I remember, because I watched this movie when I was like 9 maybe. And I was just like, I did not understand the movie at all, and I remember being quite scared of it and not really liking it. But when that part came, I was like, yeah, get those bullies, woo, woo, and I was like all for it. And I could predict that, like, as we were watching it, I was watching it with my wife. I haven't seen this movie in close to 30 years, and I was just like, he's gonna chase him back into that same dumpster that they threw him in at the beginning. Because I was like, I remembered that part of the movie so vividly, and I realized later, this is the only part of the movie I actually understood. The whole rest of the movie went so far over my head. I was confused and scared and just didn't get it until that one scene. And this is the funny part, because you can say, oh, he shouldn't have come back to Earth, and the author maybe didn't like, maybe what had been done with his story. But that one scene made that movie palatable to young me when I was little, because I did not get the rest of the movie. And so I don't want to say you have to, but I think you do need to keep your target demographic in mind. And if this book or movie, if this movie was made for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, kids, you can't just like sail over their heads with everything, right? I know you've got an important message and all. I thought the movie carried it through extremely well. But you also need the times where you're chasing the bullies and they get what's coming, and the kids can whoop and holler and have a good time, You have to include that.
Just a quick note there on this, like, target demographic or whatever. Like, I was the most direct mark for this movie in the world.
How old were you when it came out?
I was probably like around that same age as Bastian. I had the bowl haircut. I had some bully situation. I was always getting in trouble in school for like reading Dragonlance books like under the table.
Oh,
even some of the weird family stuff was relevant. So like this book
really?
just like hit me also, like, or this movie just like was like right on target for me personally.
Nice, very good.
What's interesting now that you say that, Kason, is there kind of is a different target demographic between book and film. The film was very directly made for children. Like that was exactly who they were envisioning and who they were making the movie for from the start.
Yeah, like 10, 11 maybe.
Exactly. And the book was written more for people moving into adulthood who are losing that sense of the childlike wonder. It's meant to target the people who are moving into adulthood, who are sort of like forgetting that, because they're the cause of the nothing, right? It's those people who are forgetting about their dreams and who are not using their imagination anymore that are the cause for this nothing in the first place, as is explained later on by Mork towards the end of the movie. So it's kind of interesting in that sense too, how the target demographic shifted, and that scene they talk about when they decided to put that in. It was something that the director, they for the longest time they were struggling with how to end it, and he came up with that, and that just absolutely it just pissed Michael Endoff so freaking bad, because they're not supposed to be able to come back into the real world after. And anyway, so
maybe he shouldn't have signed the rights to his work away.
He tried to take the film studio to court. He tried to shut it down. Like he tried to basically sue him, and like
Keith, buddy, man, that would have ruined your childhood, man.
Yeah. He fortunately was not successful, but he really tried. And that's how much he hated this movie and the directions that they chose. But the thing is that
I see what you're saying. I feel for him, but he's wrong.
I do too. But I also watched the director, Wolfgang. What was his last name?
Oh yeah, it was like a Swedish name, something son.
It's German, so it's a German studio that basically made this film. There's like tons of German names, Scandinavian names in the credits.
Yeah, that's Germanic. Yeah.
Well, the author is German.
When I was rewatching the movie for this the other night, I was accidentally first watching the German version, and I'm like,
oh, really?
Sounds a little bit different. The voices seem a little different. And I was like, oh, okay, there's two versions.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Nice. So the author is German. The book was originally written in German, and so it was a German studio. It was actually at the time the highest budget for a film outside of the United States or Russia that was ever made. I think it was something like 60 million marks, which was the equivalent of about $30 million or something like that at the time. Super high budget film.
Can I mention the ink in the book?
Say again?
Too soon for that? Can I mention the ink in the book?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Please do.
Yeah, so unfortunately it's not in my copy here, but in the original German versions, the book is written in multicolored ink, where I believe when it's talking about the real world, it's written in red. And when it's talking about Fantastica, it's in green ink, and there's like illuminated calligraphy and all that stuff. But notably, in certain parts of the story, the ink runs together, which is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It is such a creative idea. I mean, obviously, most people, I would say, are familiar with the film version. That already, in sort of the way it works in that meta element, right, is just like amazingly creative. But even in the novel, with the way the ink was used, which I'm sure was super expensive to print it that way.
I know publishers would really hate you for doing that.
But it is so cool, right? It's just so cool the way that he was able to like blend that concept into a medium that you never see printed in multicolors like that. It's just like unheard of. So
and something that I forget, because it's been a long time since I read the book, but if I remember right, the actual like good copy of the book would look like, this one just looks like a nice, paperback that you'd get. But like the original book, I think kind of looked exactly like the book described in the book, like other bound,
like a leather tome.
And I don't remember this, but I remember the feeling, like I remember writing notes like 15 years ago or whatever, that there was something even more meta and more interesting going on. Like the green and ink book that you are seeing when you're reading is like not exactly the same as the ink that he's seeing. And like there was like more stuff going on there that was even like more meta.
Yeah.
That's like fourth wall stuff. And that's really kind of pulling you into the story in a different way. It's in a different way than most books.
It's possibly the most effective use of the fourth wall break that I think I've ever seen in anything, because it works so much towards the core theme of the story. It's like basically what brings it all together is that meta element. Like without that, it doesn't like land the same.
Yeah, I think we can talk about that verbosely when we get to the part that was haunting.
Let's take
I've
a couple steps back here. There's a couple other things that I learned about the production that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to mention. So you were talking about the childlike empress, and her performance at the end of that movie is astounding. It's
very good.
One of the best performances by a child actor I've ever seen.
That was great.
She had never acted in anything before, and basically never acted in anything again until she was in her 40s.
Oh, wow.
She went and became a dancer. She had never acted before. They picked her purely on the look. And that was all the director, who I think is incredible, by the way. Like, based on just this fact alone, the way he worked with the actors, the way that they describe how he worked with them, and the performances he got out of them, out of these kids, some of the most like traumatic, like the horse scene in particular, Atreyu's performance is unbelievable. It's so
Atreyu
strong.
Is so good.
It's so strong. And so I
thought the main kid did pretty well too, but it's like they kept one-upping, you know, like the performance. And by the end, you're just like, these are children. This is crazy.
I know. It's some of the best performances by child actors I've ever seen. And I give so much credit to the direction. Like, that was, I think, what I took away the most from this particular viewing was how well directed the film is. I have just immense respect for the work that was done here. It's crazy. I mean, it's a huge budget film, something he hadn't done before, with, you know, crazy amounts of like giant sets and costumes and you know, puppeteering and like just absurd, huge budget thing that was so well handled, so well organized, so well directed, and a director who does, I think, what the most important thing for a director to do is connect with the actors and like pull the performances out of them, right? Like it's so easy to look at actors that are in like a bad movie and look at their performance and they're terrible actors, they suck. But like there's so much on the director there too. There really is. Like it's definitely a two-way collaboration to get a good performance. You need the director to be strong, the direction to be strong, just like the acting to be strong and the talent to be good. And even with talent that, I mean, most of these kids had never really done anything before this in terms of film, and to get those performances out of them, I just spoke volumes to his ability to get on their level, connect with them. It's really quite amazing. So I was very impressed with that, as well as just the overall cinematography and like art direction. Like, I think a lot of people remember, like they think back to this movie and they really just remember the song, like the title song, The NeverEnding Story, and they think of it as this 80s cheese kind of thing, right? And it's like, yeah, there's some synth and some drum,
the drums, the
that kind of makes it feels cheesy in this age, but like visually the film is just unbelievable. It has aged so well. There are so many shots, like when the rock biter's first coming up to the camp and like his like little bike thing is like getting closer to them and they're like
that looks great.
It looked amazing. It looked amazing. The shot was like so well composited and sold. I think
I really thought that, I was like, these people are running away. This was in the 1980s. How is it, you know, like it's going to run over them?
It looks so convincing. I think the only shots in the movie that don't like hold up are like the stop motion Falcor like flying around in like wide shots. Like obviously like those kind of look dated. But aside from that, visually, like Morla, just like, dude, that it looks so good. Like it's incredible. So I was very impressed with the overall direction of the film, the cinematography. I think it really holds up. Keith, I think you were going to say something there.
Yeah, I just want to co-sign that, and then to give a little love also for the music, not the theme song. I do love the theme song.
I love the theme song too. Yeah.
But the thing that I always remember when I think of the movie is just sort of like those background synth tracks, you know, do 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 do, like it's just so it's like such a mood. I love it. And one other thing I want to mention, if you can maybe give me screen share, I can share with you a funny personal story that I have with the childlike empress, if it's possible.
Can you do that from your end, or do you need me to do something?
See if this. Okay, it does. Okay, so a few years ago, are you seeing my screen?
Yes. Oh, is that her?
Yeah. So yeah, I got to meet the actress Tammy Stronach at just like an event. But the interesting sort of postscript of this, so I'll stop sharing my screen, was that we got to talking, and she was kind of knowledgeable, sort of the kind of charity work that I do, the life extension research.
Oh, cool.
And my friend Tim is making a movie called The Last Generation to Die. There's a short film that exists, so people can go out there and watch the 13-minute film, which I think is a very emotionally impactful. But we engaged her in conversation of maybe being in a role in that feature-length movie, which could be crazy.
Oh, nice.
And then I have a funny, embarrassing postscript to that story, because this is obviously like so cool for me, because I freaking love this movie. It was haunted by that scene, like Kaysen was. And then I kind of like did something a little bit embarrassing, where when she was talking about like a researcher friend of hers, completely innocently, I just referred to it like, oh, and he, right? When she's like, hey, it's a she. And I was like, I'm an ally, really, I didn't mean that. So I felt like I sullied myself in front of the childlike empress, and I had to make amends. That one little now it turned out okay, but I'm saying that was a moment of deep shame for me that I had to quickly turn around. That I instinctively made that assumption that the researcher was male and he was not. Well, we can always be better. That's the better to remind you of that than the childlike empress.
So what was that event where you met her? Was that just like a con, or like what?
Yeah, like a Comic-Con kind of thing or something like that.
Yeah, she seems to be still pretty active as far as like engaging fans and things like that, even though she wasn't really much of an actress after this movie. More so even than the other two actors have been. I know Noah, I forget his last name, the guy who played Atreyu. He's probably a little more active than the I'm so bad with names. This is like a mental illness I have. I can't remember anyone's names. But the kid who plays Bastion, he seems to be a little bit more sort of distant from the project and things like that. But she's like really engaged still. I thought that was really cool.
No, she was actually like super like wonderful. Like we had a pretty long conversation, and she was great. She also signed my copy of the movies. All right,
nice, fantastic.
Nice.
That's great. Okay, cool. I want to shift really quick because, I mean, obviously there are a lot of things we can, or a lot of directions we could go in the conversation from here. But I wanted first to turn it over to the two of you, because I'd love to get some of your thoughts or your notes on things that you picked up in terms of like symbolism, the way that hooks into the theme. I've been dying to hear this because I know Kaysen hasn't watched the movie in forever. I've seen it a million times. I watch it like twice annually, pretty much. But for somebody who had been so disconnected from it for so long, like how much of that kind of thing were you finding in the story?
Tons. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. This movie was very well made. It's specifically in that area. Like the symbolism is just unbelievable. The reason I avoided this movie for so long and never watched it again is because of the childlike empress. I really want to get to that at the end. I was horrified. Have you ever heard of gosh, you know what? This almost reminds me a bit of the way that Gimli describes Galadriel, at least before, right? Like a terrible beauty, something like that.
Yes.
Like I was 9 years old, so I was just like, this is a beautiful person in front of me, but I am freaked out by her presence. Like it was too much for me. But I want to bring up, okay, in terms of symbolism, there's this big one right here, which is the trials, right? The two trials that he has to pass through.
Right.
Those are gates. Cherubim, right? Like obviously, this is the veil of the temple that he's going into, and there are the two cherubim on each side. If you've ever looked into how the Temple of Solomon was built, you had the two cherubim kind of facing forwards on the veil, and then within the veil you had the two cherubim on top of the Ark of the Covenant, right? Or some people say it was on the side of it. Anyways, it's not super clear, but most people depict it as on top of the lid there were two beings that looked like sphinxes with wings and, you know, different kind of like animal hybrid features, but then, you know, human features as well. And so when he shows up and it's like, look, you have to, you know, you can't just walk through the veil of the temple, right? You can't just go into the Holy of Holies. You can't do it. You've got to be a certain person. You've got to make the proper sacrifices, right? And Atreyu goes in there, and he's able to pass through, right? And it's fascinating because in one way, he offered the proper sacrifice, which was his heart and his confidence, and he walked right in there the proper way. But then halfway through, he flounders and like has to kind of like trick them and like jump forward. I thought that was funny. But the best part with the mirror, I actually feel like they maybe could have done more with the mirror in particular. But the mirror is another veil, but it is the entrance into. There were two veils in the temple, anyways. It is another entrance into the Holy of Holies, which the movie kind of presents as inside of yourself, right? Into your true self, your mind, your spirit, your heart, your soul, whatever it is. And when you walk into the mirror, you walk into like yourself in a way, and then you see the two cherubim again, and this time it is the voice of God that is manifest between the two of them, right? And it's really, really cool stuff. But that's just straight up biblical symbolism right there, that I thought was absolutely just fascinatingly done. I have not seen the way that those the sphinxes, the cherubim, were kind of designed. I thought was fascinating. I don't know why they're blue in the end. That's one thing I didn't really pick up on at all. But that whole sequence gave like some really good symbolism. Also, the luck dragon is certainly like a more Asian flavor of the dragon, right? A dragon that doesn't have wings but can still fly and maybe has like fur and feathers and is less
total. Who really likes children.
Yes, sure, and is lucky and is a symbol of luck, right? That's China. That's not the Western dragons, right? That's the Eastern dragons, right?
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of symbolism kind of from both sides and a lot of global stuff too, because obviously Atreyu, you know, the hunter of the purple buffalo, right? That is probably supposed to be referencing something along the lines of Native American legends as well. And the makeup, okay, when the emperor, or is it the emperor's servant? I can't remember what it was.
It's like a chancellor kind of guy or something.
When he calls everybody in from the four corners of the earth, you know, and they all show up there, the way they look is just wild. The creativity on display, showing the different inhabitants of Fantasia, is absolutely wild. It was super, super well done. But the girl, of course, the biggest symbolism possibly that in this kind of the whole point of this entire movie is building up to is that point at the very end where he's holding a single grain of sand in his hand, and this is all that is left of Fantasia, right? This is what happens. This is once again, I mean, I probably would use like Bible imagery for a lot of this, but it's mostly like the flood. It's mostly like the dissolution of all things, but the preservation of one seed. It's a seed is what it is. She says it's a grain of sand, but what it really is it's a seed, right? This is a seed that if you water it will grow back up. So you almost have that like X movement, right? Where you have all these things at the bottom and they all move away. And then there's like a point at the very center of the cross that then goes back up and then can funnel upwards as well. And it's that point right there. That's the hinge point. And it all kind of builds together towards what is essentially a seed, right? Just the point of everything, the point of all of this, right? And it's all that's left. And just like the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of the Covenant, sorry, Noah's Ark was the seed of Earth, you know, back in those times. And there's a lot of symbolism for this, you know, concept as well. But everything kind of boils down to a seed that can then expand into new things. I also picked up some intense Outer Wilds vibes as well. This is basically the Outer Wilds, the movie.
I think there's a reason why there are certain connections I make to what's now considered my favorite game, Outer Wilds, and what was certainly my favorite film as a child, which is this. And it all kind of boils down to that same principle.
It's the approach, the humble approach of delicate situations like death. Yeah. Go, Keith.
Yeah. So I just want to pick up the ball. I agree with everything you said, Case, and then also I was going to tie it to Outer Wilds, but then you just did. But also even to Xenosaga and a lot of stuff that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
This idea of almost like the cosmological egg or whatever, the big crunch. Like things go back to the beginning and explode out again. And, every time someone reads a book, this all starts again, etc. And that's more in the book where you get the sense that this is a cyclical process of people, passing the book to the next person, and it's crunch out. Yeah. And obviously, the most obvious symbol is the one that's on the cover of the book, right? The Orin, which is just two Ouroboroses kind of intertwined.
See, right? This actually fascinated me. That was so interesting to me because I was like, okay, you've got an Ouroboros, which is the purpose of the Ouroboros is unity, right? Is a single enclosed system, self-sufficient, but also self-devouring, right? But self-reproducing as well. But it's all an enclosed single system of whatever's inside. But when you have two snakes, you actually get a similar symbolism. The symbolism's similar, but instead of unity, it's duality. It's you have the darker serpent and then the gold serpent, but then they both meet together and are kind of feeding off of each other. And it's more of like a dualistic symbolism of what otherwise is just the Ouroboros.
So it's worth it to say that, as far as I understand it, I think Michael Anda was also kind of like an alchemist and involved in, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, like anthroposophy, which is kind of like the, human, microcosm, macrocosm, all that kind of jazz, right? So this is obviously just sort of like saturating everything in the book and the movies. And again, just this idea that we've talked about at length in the other podcasts that we've done together of, immortality or life and death, etc. Obviously, even Morla, you had mentioned the old one, the turtle, right? There, Morla kind of represents sort of the view that immortality could become nihilistic, right? Like, we don't even care if we care, right?
Like, that was funny.
I love that line. That was such a great line.
And she says that she's allergic to youth. Also, something
I noticed that. That was the first time I've seen this movie so many times. As a child, I always thought Morla said, "I'm allergic to you."
That's what I thought.
But it's not. It's I'm allergic to youth. And I was like, whoa, that totally changes like how I view the scene.
Yeah, that's deeper.
So we don't have to go retread, everyone go watch the previous podcast for all that conversation. But something that I wanted to note here that's not really symbolism per se, although I want to lay a seed for you later, Kason, which is obviously the ivory tower and all the flower motifs.
Yes.
I'm sure you can have fun with that.
Oh my gosh, yes, I noticed that very well. Yeah.
Something the movie does really, really well, that's almost like taking a page from like psychoanalytical studies, is it's really priming you throughout the movie for that end punchline. I want to take a deviation at some point to really, because I don't think we have actually explained on this podcast just kind of like what the nothing is and what the actual quest actually is. So we should spend some time there. But before we get into that, the movie does a really great job of priming you in the psychoanalytical sense for the final scene, where it's creating this lensing, this Chinese box story within a story within a story within a story kind of thing, right? And setting up
it's a fractal.
The connection between you and Bastian, and the connection between Bastian and Atreyu in a lot of small ways. Like Bastian, he decides not to eat the rest of his sandwich because there's a long journey to go, just as Atreyu is doing the same thing, right? There's that scene with the Sphinxes. I want to talk about this. In my opinion, the three best scenes in this movie four best scenes are the Rockbiter's hand speech, the Sphinxes, the ending, and I'm forgetting the fourth one. Man, we'll get there. Gamorre's whole speech.
Okay. Right? That was very interesting.
Yes, but the point is that in that scene with the Sphinxes, again, you have the lensing. You have Atreyu psyching himself up. You have Inglewook, where that guy says, "Run, Atreyu." You have Bastian going, "Run, Atreyu," and you, the audience, are going, "Run, Atreyu." It's creating this like mirroring. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost like Inception. Yeah, but then it fractals out, and it does create a very intense, dramatic situation where you, as the viewer, could also be shouting, "Run," or whatever it is. And then
so that kind of thing happens like 4 or 5 times in the movie, where in very subtle ways it's setting up this kind of telescoping, connecting you to the story within a story within a story to lead up to the punch at the end.
That's so cool.
Yeah. One thing, touching back on the Orin symbol again, that is a little bit stronger in the book in terms of its symbolism, is the connection, or almost the yin-yang nature, between Bastian and Atreyu as well. So in the book, Bastion is described as being fat and like having like real deep insecurities about feeling ugly and weak and like not capable, and really having this, I guess you could almost call it jealousy of Atreyu, who's like athletic, like all the things that he feels like he's not.
That reminds me of Fight Club a little bit.
Yeah, actually. And so there's this really, really strong bond that is much, much more deeply, and I think in a much more layered, complex way in the novel, explored between Bastion's connection to Atreyu and how he's like affecting the story without like realizing it until like later on he begins to realize, oh, like I can directly, you know, have an impact on what happens in the story. It takes him a while to realize that, but he's making those realizations through Atreyu. And so that Orin symbol, I think, in a large way, also sort of represented that concept. It represented sort of like the yin-yang nature between Atreyu and Bastion. So,
yeah. It's also just like Jungian integration, basically, because to your point, I think it was Kaysen, like the mirror scene hits much heavier in the book for this reason, and the phrase that's in the movie from the guy Engelwick or whatever, it's just like one of those cool lines where it's like, kind people find they are cruel, brave men discover that they're really cowards, confronted with their true selves, most men run away screaming, right? So that and again, it's kind of glossed over a little bit in the movie, but that is kind of what happens, right? You know, like Bastion throws the book down, Atreyu's like, oh, this is crazy, but then Bastion picks up the book, and then Atreyu walks through the mirror. So it's like integrating, you know.
As much as Michael and
books are mirrors as well. In fact, this specific book represents a mirror in a real way to Bastion. The way he's hearing his own voice being read out within the book. You know, the things that he thinks of as happening are happening here, or the fact that he has some, like, it's almost like an image of himself that is being represented within the book.
Yeah.
So it's there's both. Yeah, I like that.
As much as Michael Ende like hated the film and thought that they ruined everything about it, and while this is admittedly, and I think almost expectedly based on the format of the storytelling, like a deeper, more complex, more layered relationship in the novel, I do think they did at least a pretty good job of hinting at this with like examples like Keith was just saying. There's multiple times where Bastion says he like kind of wants to give up or like wants to leave, like the storm is blowing and he's kind of scared, and then he says no, like Atreyu wouldn't give up, right? And that's all based on how Bastion in the novel version viewed himself as like weak and like a coward, and looked up to, or maybe had some like sort of form of jealousy of Atreyu's courage. But like where he really, really bonds with Atreyu is when Atreyu hesitates at the Sphinxes, the first gate. When Atreyu shows for the first time to him that he also has self-doubts and also, you know, like
is afraid of death.
Right? That's when like the bond becomes really strong, and then you have the mirror scene in the next one where they're basically mirroring each other. So anyway, there's some really cool symbolism with the Orin that I think is probably easy to miss in the film version, but which represents that connection between those two characters as well.
And that's the important thing, is that the old man had said people run away when they see the mirror, right? But of course the integration is that as you walk towards the mirror, then that part walks towards you. You come together as a single, unified individual. And that is where like the Holy of Holies is to be found, right? That within that integration of yourself, within your other self that you pretend doesn't exist, that within the integration of those things, properly done so, you find that you actually, like, it's almost like the voice of God is just revealed to you right there, and you know what to do. You have a purpose, and it was really good because, as you step towards the mirror, you're stepping towards yourself, and people do have a hard time with that. I've often wondered, like, if I ever met myself, I've often said this, actually, I've thought this for a long time, but that if some weird time loop anomaly happened and I was able to meet myself, we wouldn't get along. Like, I wouldn't like that guy. I'd be like, stop it, just listen to me, stop it, just do the thing. It would be a huge would be a huge problem. And I know that about myself. I've known it for a long time.
On that subject, I want to share something too that affected me. Another haunting scene from this movie. Because we're on it again, might as well talk about it now. The Sphinx, right?
Yeah.
Something about that scene with the eyes opening, the lasers, was really sort of like ontologically terrifying to me as a child. Not for exactly in the movie they kind of make it clear that it's kind of tied to like self-doubt or whatever, and that's what will make the Sphinx eyes open. But I don't know if this is like a self-worth thing. I think I have a healthy self-esteem now, but like, let me just say it this way. I think every person, I would imagine every person kind of believes that, like, this kind of goes into Dostoevsky or whatever as well. Like, if someone else like truly saw you at the heart, like, they would love you, right? They would think you're worthy, right? Like, it's just the people don't understand, right? They're not seeing the real me, right? So the thing that I found like terrifying about the Sphinxes is like, what if there was this kind of deity that could truly pierce and see into the real you and then still judge you as not worthy? How crushing.
Oh, that's so bad. Oh my God.
Now, riffing on that a little bit, I think at least the way that I kind of interpreted it on this watch was not even so much that the Sphinxes were judging his worthiness. They were judging whether or not he was judging himself this way. Absolutely. And that's when they attack.
There's something deep there.
It's like if he doubts, that's when it's not whether or not they judge his worthiness, but it's punishing you for judging yourself too harshly, almost. Which is like,
now, the reason why
I didn't
necessarily like that as much in the movie is because, like, you can be kind of like an a-hole and be confident, right?
Right, exactly. Now, I don't know if that interpretation is correct, but like that, at least the way it's worded by Anguiwook or whatever is like,
it seems that way.
It seems that way, and Atreyu is able to get through by being confident. That's why he's able to pass. It's not that he passed their test of worthiness. It's that his confidence got him through the trial, and that's what you really need, is to get over the self-doubt. That's what makes you pass.
It's worth noting that it's Bastian yelling, "Be confident," into the book.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. That's right. So this is the job of a Sphinx, by the way, is to pose a riddle to somebody. And you've just explained the riddle right there. That it sounds like you need to do one thing, but really in doing, in basically dodging them and forcing your way through anyways, you're actually getting through the way that you're meant to get through, which is to just be confident that you will get through no matter what. And Sphinxes and just the Sphinx in general, this is an old Greek legend, but the idea of a Sphinx is the idea of a riddle that is waiting to be solved. Right. And I feel like you've explained kind of the riddle and how he solved. I think it's beautiful.
Sure. Yeah. Another thing that I thought was really clever about the mirror scene is like Atreyu's quest is actually to go find an Earthling child and bring him to the childlike Empress. Right. So that the child can give the new name. He didn't know this, but that contact with the mirror, kind of with what we were just talking about, Case, and you had talked about like the integration, the two like coming together as you approach it, right? This is like a representation, a symbol of how Atreyu, even unknowingly, is contacting and bringing this child into the world of Fantasia, like inadvertently, not knowing that that's what he's doing, but he's actually accomplishing the quest. And it all happens, and again, maybe a little more strongly in the novel version, when Bastian is able to connect with Atreyu's lack of self-esteem and his doubt. It's like when he can finally see like that there's a character weakness in him, like me, like he actually is like fully connecting with the character in the way that, we are meant to connect with fictional characters and stories. We're meant to see ourselves a little bit in them.
Yeah.
And,
they're meant to be mirrors, in other words, to some degree.
Mirrors to us. And so, like, this is the moment where that happens, like, in full force for Bastian, and where he's fully sucked into this thing now. Like, he's 100% committed to it. And that was Atreyu's purpose. That was his quest. That's where it was fulfilled. he doesn't know it, and he's like rushing back to the childlike empress at this point after talking with the oracles, not knowing, or I guess he's trying to go find the boundaries of Fantasia to find this kid, but he had already done it just through making that connection, being vulnerable for a minute, right?
Wow.
So I really like how the mirror serves as a symbol for that kind of the accomplishing of the quest as well.
It almost sounds like that when you open yourself up to yourself, right, to really integrating yourself, and you're at peace with that, you also open yourself up to other people.
Yeah,
right.
Because Atreyu
in a positive way.
Atreyu had been in every other way throughout the rest of the film. Well, I guess you could say there was some vulnerability shown with Artax's scene, which we still need to get back to. But like here, I mean, he was, in Bastian's eyes at least, like this amazing, strong warrior who didn't have the same cowardice or the same weaknesses that he had. And it was only when he showed that like Bastian was sort of like brought in fully integrated, like you're saying. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, very good.
Now, we should probably step back and touch on the nothing a little bit, like Keith was saying. Just getting a little bit more into that. We can probably talk a little bit about Gamork's description of it as well, and like how it serves as a metaphor for that sort of passing into adulthood, forgetting your dreams, letting go of the things that were that you wanted or like strived for as a child, right? And that this is the cause of this nothing that destroys Fantasia. Did you have some notes on that, Keith?
Yeah, so this is one of those rare cases where sometimes you can critique, like, oh, you know, and you guys have done it in the past, justifiably, in my opinion, you know, like over exposition, right? Gamork's explanation of the nothing is like one of the most, in my opinion, like justified and perfect uses of like overt exposition that I've ever seen in a movie.
I totally agree.
Because, yeah, right, because this is one of those things that when I was a kid, first watching the movie in the beginning, this is where it starts, where you get the sense that already there's this confusion in the beginning when the rock biter first shows up, and like, oh, was it a hole? Was it this? No, you know, that would be something. Like, this is nothing, you know. So like right away, it's like it's like meant to kind of like confuse you or make you like as a child be like, something, it's not just like a dragon or lightning bolt, there's something else going on here. It's like beyond, you know, it's like almost Lovecraftian, you know, like this is beyond your mental ability to render whatever it is, right? And then, you know, it's destroying everything, it's consuming everything, kind of like facelessly. It's not like Sauron or anything, you know, it's just this force, right? And then even as it leads up into the Gamork scene, you know, it has in the subtext of it this idea of free will and destiny and purpose, because how does that scene get arrived at? Atreyu walks into this place where there's all these frescoes, and he's seeing like that, him and Morla and Artax in the swamp, which we'll get to again, right? And then one of the coolest, you know, transitions in the movie, he sees Gamork, and then boom, there's Gamork. Right,
so
there,
good,
right?
Yeah, that was cool.
It reminded me a lot. Well, I don't know if it reminded me. I saw this movie way before I played Journey, obviously, but Journey has a similar thing where there's just all those murals that tell the story so far, and then you see what's about to happen, and there's just this moment like, oh crap, like something crazy is coming up. I wonder if that game took notes from this scene. Now that I was watching, I was like, oh, that's like almost exactly the same effect as what happens in Journey. Like you see the whole thing, every like key moment, but now there's like a foreshadow for something bad that's about to happen, and then Gamork's right there. Is so beautifully executed.
Absolutely. And then again, this is a children's movie, right? But Gamork does not pull any punches in this speech. He just lays it right out there, and he's like, there are people out there that want you to be enslaved to them, and they want you to have no freaking dreams, and they're gonna break
hope.
Right? And I'm helping that, because they don't get it in the book. It's almost like I believe Gamork exists in both worlds, because he's a werewolf, so he exists in the wolf form in Fantastica, but he's actually like a lawyer or something in the real world. You know, like this is a little bit more contrived in the book. Like he's literally working for like corporations and stuff to kind of like break people's spirits, right? So it's like very overt there. And you know, something else that's touched on in the Artax scene, I guess this is a good way to lead into it, but this is a part that was in the book. It's where they are in the scene. It's called Spook City, where Gmork actually is. It's not really covered in the movie at all, but in the book, there's this whole scene of like Gmork is actually chained there, you know. But there's a whole city of people that are just walking off and like throwing themselves into the nothing because they've given hope.
Oh,
wow. They've
lost
hope.
Wow. That's so much cooler. I love that.
Right. Yeah. So that this idea, this is what I mean, it pulls no punches. Like the nothing is also directly related to suicide. Yeah, and that is the Artax scene. Wow. It is the swamp that just keeps pulling you down, and you see there's no way to get out. No one can reach you. You know, like, so that's what I mean. This movie is very like squarely on the nose, very dark, and doesn't pull those punches when Gmork basically levers that right at Atreyu. And then of course it comes to one of the coolest reprisals of come for me, Gmork. I am Atreyu.
Dude, that is such a cool shot too. Like he dives at him, and then you just kind of see he rolls it over, and he's like stabbed him in the heart. Like I loved that scene as a kid. I just thought it was so cool. Like
I remember it.
The way he faced him with like all that confidence. I'd rather die fighting if we're gonna die anyway, you know. I again, the performance of that actor being a child,
he's good.
He has a really powerful voice, even though he's like not passed through puberty yet. He's still got like his high pitched boy voice, but like his ability to scream or yell or like project is actually like he's got a lot of presence to him. I was very impressed by it.
Me too.
So yeah, I love again the sort of metaphor there of the nothing and like what it represents. Now that, you know, I'm in my late 30s, you know, as you're saying, Keith, in your 40s, but I think another reason why I've been so impressed by you, and I love having you on the show anytime I can, is that you have sort of embodied kind of what this movie and then what we talked about a little bit in Xenosaga. You sort of like went all for it. Like you've even passing into the adulthood, you didn't lose that sense of like dreaming big and wanting to like accomplish things that most people would have probably given up on a long time ago, and trying to make these things real and you know, the whole inventor side of what you do. And so I really, really am inspired by that. And I was thinking a lot about that just today at work and stuff like that. I was thinking to myself, have I settled? I think that's what the movie is sort of like directly asking the adults in the audience. Have you settled where you're at? So like my dreams, I would say ever since I was 9 or 10 years old, I wanted to make big budget movies like this. I wanted to make the NeverEnding Story. I wanted to make The Lord of the Rings. That was what I saw myself doing when I was a child. And I'm sitting there at work today, and, you know, I'm working in video production. I'm working in like the field, but have I settled? Have I settled where I am? Was what I was thinking about like all day today. And
that's so funny.
Have I lost that dream? Right? Has the nothing already began taking its course on me? Has it devoured that dream already or not? And so I was kind of sitting there, you know, writing a script for you know, something that we're going to be producing here at the end of the month, and I was just thinking to myself, like, I've got this novel I've been writing that's not done yet, though I've probably made more progress on that than any other of my big dreams. There's all these things, and I'm just going like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to like recapture that again and go all in on it and go for it? So I think that's really the core of the message of the movie that I certainly did not understand as a kid, just like you were talking about, Kaysen, right? Because again, I don't think you can understand it until you are an adult. This is the kind of movie where you have to watch it as a child and then as an adult to really fully appreciate what it's trying to say, because you have to juxtapose those two states of mind. The way that you think about your life and your future as a child, and then the way you are either pursuing it or settling as an adult. So that really struck me hard.
That's so funny, but I still think you probably understood, because you at least liked the movie. You probably understood the movie more than I comically misunderstood this movie. I thought the whole point of the movie was for him to get back at the bullies at the end. Like that was the point of the movie in my mind.
Yeah. Michael Endo was probably right to be pissed in a certain sense for that
well,
reason.
Once again, when you said, you shouldn't settle, you should always chase your dreams. Well, that is what the movie's saying. However, that's not what the book was saying. The book was saying you should probably find a middle point that you settle in between the two. Right? At least that's what I'm getting from you guys. I think
maybe the way I would put that is what we're saying about this movie, and which is the first half of the book, is correct, but there is a way in which you can overstep and sort of lose yourself, right? Like there is a yin yang kind of balance, which is the symbol of the R and again, right? There's two halves of this book.
Yeah.
There's two.
So this movie is only the first half of the whole book?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we're only getting one of those snakes of the message. The other side of that coin, the other serpent, is what's delivered in the second half of the book. But you need the unity of those two parts, I think, to really get at what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say thank you for those words, Mike. It means a lot to me. And not to aggrandize my own experience too much, but something that I found to maybe quote Jensen from Deus Ex in video game, if you want enemies, like, try to change something, right? And what I found just in my life is that, I think I'm really trying to act altruistically, trying to save people's lives, do all these good things, invent new medical technologies. But, I'm sure this happens to a lot of people, but a lot of times in my life, that, like, trying to sort of be kind of like that beacon sort of attracts kind of forces that, for whatever reason, just want to completely destroy you for that. And it can be very, like, depressing, very lonely, very isolating. When you're really just like, I'm trying to save your life, man. And so
tough.
For me, like, never settling, that is one of my, like, mantras, right? But part of that might mean that, like, the trappings of a normal happy life will, like, never be mine, because I'm not settling, right?
There's a sacrifice, a sacrifice
that
is made in that, and that's kind of what is symbolized in he has to sacrifice the memories to, like, bring Fantasia back and continue doing these wishes. So there is a great sacrifice that comes with dreaming big, like dreaming big and, like, going all in on trying to accomplish something great. Like, you're not going to come out of that unscathed. and that's why most people do settle. That's why most people don't continue. It's hard. It's really, really freaking hard. And you have to deal with the insecurity of, I don't think I don't think I can do it. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough capital. I don't have the connections. I don't have the expertise. There's a million reasons why not to do it. Because it's easier not to do it. That's really the key. But if you're going to go for it, you're going to dream big and you're going to go all in. It's going to require some big sacrifices, and those are painful for sure. So I totally see what you're saying. The only other thing that I really, like, took notes on, I think we've pretty well covered, like, the main things I wanted to get through. But I don't think we can leave an analysis of this without talking about the Swamp of Sadness and the Artax sinking scene. Like, it's like the saddest, most depressing thing in a child's movie, I think, of all time. And, you were talking, Keith, about the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and some other movies from this time. They all have that a similarity to them, where these are movies that were targeted and made for kids, but they did not shy away from some dark, depressing, scary, creepy stuff, right? Kaysen and I have talked about this quite a bit. He reads, books to his children, stories, and tries not to shy away from those more ancient types of stories that didn't, shy away from those darker, scary stuff either. And I think that's so important. I guess another thing Kaysen has talked a lot about too in our podcast in the past is how people were much more accustomed to the idea of death from, like, a much younger age. People didn't live as long. They were around it a lot more often. They saw it. And so maybe we're more familiar, more comfortable with it than maybe we are today. And so there's maybe this hesitancy, like, oh no, we can't show the children this; it's too scary for them, or whatever. But I really do think it's important, and for me, like, yeah, I was really creeped out. I was like terrified of this movie. I was terrified of the Dark Crystal, but like I kept watching them, even though I was scared. I kept watching them. There was something so fascinating and so like deeply human in it that like I just like couldn't turn away. You know what I mean? And so, anyways, this scene, Kaysen recalls the chasing the bullies at the end being the part that stuck out to him the most as a child. For me, it was definitely the Artax scene. Like, it's just so traumatic and like scarring. Like and the performance, like I said, was just so brilliant. He goes through like such a wave of emotions. Like he's trying to be like, come on, like encouraging him, and then he notices he's sinking, and just like the initial shock of that, like, oh no, like he's screaming at him, but then he like, you know, kind of comes over. It's you know, he's trying to be soft again, and then he gets pissed. He like legitimately gets mad. He's like slapping the water, like, stupid horse, you're an idiot, like you're gonna die, like stop. And then he gets mad, and then he gets like totally devastated again. And that range of emotions in this very compressed space of time just feels so convincing as to the racing thoughts that must be going through his head. And there's even a moment where he's begging him, like, move, please, like, please, I'm begging. Like but he's like, I'm not going to give up. Like, it is an incredible scene. It is so dynamic. It moves so well.
And even the lines that he says, even though they're very simple, they're also sort of pregnant with richer meaning. You know, you have to move or you'll die. You know, things like that.
Yeah. Very good. That's very meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, when you really pick those out, right? When you're really like looking at those closer, because they can be almost deceptively simple, but like everything in the movie, it's a metaphor for like something that is like truly meaningful about passing into adulthood, about settling, about not moving somewhere, about you know, the fact that that in not moving, like you just said, you have to move or you'll die. And then you juxtapose that with the book's imagery of the people just throwing themselves into the nothing after losing hope, which is exactly what had happened with the horse here. Like, that's what it's warning against. It's warning against losing hope, losing your dreams, and quitting or halting your movement forward, right? That leads to a stagnation, to a depression that will kill you.
And it shows, you know, on the part of the book, of course, but also even in the movie directors or whatever for leaving it in. Again, it's such a raw, and in the German version, because like I said, I accidentally watched that one and then watched the English version. They're both equally emotionally impactful, but in the the version that we watched, you know, there's kind of music and it's sad and stuff. In the German version, there's no artifice whatsoever. It's just the raw sounds of Artax like screaming and whinnying, and it's kind of like howling in a different way, right?
Wow.
But the point is the raw emotional honesty of that, especially in a children's movie, that like sometimes things are not going to work out.
Yeah.
And like just like being like in your face about that. It's like, it's kind of shocking, you know?
Yeah. Another thing that I kind of picked up on, because this was not from this viewing, but from the previous viewing that I had done, which was actually just maybe 4 or 5 months ago. Because I had watched Lord of the Rings for when we were doing that analysis. I had also read the novel. So I was focusing, what I was really focusing on at the time was trying to look at the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, the novel version, and trying to understand where a lot of, I think, more modern criticism of its prose comes from. And people thinking it's super boring, which I just don't agree with at all. I just can't see it. I don't.
Get out of here.
But large portion of that goes towards the Tom Bombadil part, right? Like, this character is kind of useless.
Nope.
And I don't agree. I think Tom Bombadil is great. I love all of those chapters. But I was trying to think about that. I was like, okay, why does it work for me? Because I can see how some people would look at his entrance to save them from the Willow as like a Deus Ex Machina, like someone just shows up and, oh, you had no idea this person existed. They just show up and save them, right? And so I had that on my mind, and I watched the NeverEnding Story and the Wizard of Oz kind of back to back.
Yeah, that's right.
And in the Wizard of Oz, they are in that field of flowers that is like it's not poisoned, but it's like there's like a sleep spell put on them by the evil witch. And so they walk in there and they start falling asleep, and like the monkeys are coming to like get them. But then like Galinda just shows up and just like, wake up, everybody, go back to normal. And she just like saves them. And it's like kind of a Deus Ex Machina again, right? And I was like, okay. Similarly, this movie has something kind of like a Tom Bombadil. That's interesting. And then I'm watching NeverEnding Story, and it's this scene in the after Morla and after the horses died, and he's just crawling through the swamps of sadness and sinking, and then a luck dragon just shows up out of freaking nowhere and just grabs him and takes him all the way the 10,000 miles to where he's supposed to go, and it just solves the problem like that. And so I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, all three of these I could see people criticizing as being these Deus Ex Machina, just out of nowhere, God in the machine just shows up and saves you. And that's kind of, cheap writing for like solving a big problem or a big conflict. And I was like, wait a second. The pattern that I noticed is that all three of these happen right at the beginning of the quest. It's like in the infancy of the quest. And so I kind of started looking at the quest itself as a character. Right? In the beginning of the quest is still like an infant. It's still a child. It still needs an adult, wizened, wise figure to come in and like pick them up when they fall and like get them back on its feet and get it moving again. But there has to come a time if you do this, right? There has to come a time when you do this. I think what that establishes is that the world is super dangerous, and that the main character is going to need help along the way. They can't do it by themselves. But there will come a moment in the maturity of the quest where they will have to face that big challenge by themselves. And all the growth that they've experienced through the story, everything they've learned from the wise figure, from everyone else that they've encountered, from the experience that they've gathered, will lead them to gain the courage or whatever it is that they need. In the Wizard of Oz's case, right, all these characters are looking for specific things, looking for a heart, looking for a brain. So they had to demonstrate that they developed that through the quest, even though they're still haven't technically received those things from the Wizard of Oz yet. The Scarecrow devises the plan. The lion shows the courage to carry it out. They realize that they had it in them all along, and that was developed throughout the story. But Galinda doesn't show up to save them in that final encounter against the witch at the end, right? They have to do that now on their own. And so I've noticed that that's kind of a pattern, or maybe like a structure of this type of fantasy story, where like you can get away with that. I don't even want to term it as getting away with it, but you can use that at the beginning to sort of like broaden your world. And I think that that's what this does so well, is the world gets way bigger. Fantasia just gets like immensely huge when a luck dragon shows up and like takes him all that way, right?
10,000 miles.
Yeah, it like expands the universe and makes it so much more mysterious and cool, and allows for a Deus Ex Machina sort of saving him in that moment. But he still is going to end up having to face that mirror by himself. He's still going to end up, having to mature in the quest as it goes on. And so I've kind of noticed that in a lot of these sort of fantasy stories, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm hitting on something with that or not, but I feel like it works. I feel like it really works for a story if you structure it in that way. So
just to jump in really quick, Kaysen, it's 9,988 miles, I believe.
Didn't go the full 10. Anyway, didn't go the full 10.
To completely back up Mike's point, it is of course worth noting that in that pivotal scene where he does stand up and defeat Gamork, he is without the luck dragon, and even he has lost the Oran.
That's right. He lost the amulet as well.
That's right. Does he ever get that back? I actually can't remember.
Yeah, they both come back right after.
Yeah,
Falkor gets the Oran and comes back and picks him up.
Yeah, he dives into the water and like picks it up off of the ocean floor and then lifts it and takes it back.
But he has to face that ultimate trial completely by himself.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that was something.
So if you're writing a fantasy story, I think this is important. I think that this exists as like a part of the story's structure for a reason. And I think that you can take advantage of that to put your character in an impossible situation early and then expand your world by having some character show up that like nobody expects. And it's just like, whoa, this is like crazy. Who is this guy? Who's this Tom Bombadil? He's like really wild. Nobody knows who Tom Bombadil is to this day. Nobody can like tell, is he like one of the Valar or something greater than them, or is he like the spirit of the earth itself? Like no one knows, but it makes the world so much more mysterious.
Whatever he is eldest.
Yeah.
Whatever that even means.
Whatever that means. And so like you can use that to like really make your story big, but then they can go away and the characters and the quest can mature, and eventually they're going to have to face that ultimate challenge on their own. So I like that. I feel like that kind of came together for me and justified Tom Bombadil after all these years.
I do. That's funny. I do have a question though, in terms of the Oran. Does he use that for anything afterwards?
In the book, it's almost like that's kind of like the vehicle for him to make those wishes, where he brings something into Fantastica but loses his memory. And I think it says, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, on the underside of it, it says something like "do what you wish" or something like that. Like
do what thou wilt.
Yeah, I think so. Doesn't it also kind of guide Atreyu in the early part of the quest? It's like it's supposed to give him some direction as to where he should go and.
Yeah, and I think it's supposed to like completely or almost completely protect him from mortal danger. This is why he doesn't succumb to the swamps of sadness until like much later after Arthas.
I was gonna say he was so sad when the horse was going, yet he never sank.
That's interesting.
That's fascinating. So because it's hard to tell in the movie whether that actually does anything or not.
Yeah, I like that.
So I was just gonna say it's worth noting that to underline the main theme that we think it is, right? You know, the Oran is the vehicle of wishes. So so keeping your wishes close to you can be a protective, bolstering talisman.
Love that, dude. That's awesome. That's freaking deep. That's so cool. All right. I I think I've gotten through basically everything I wanted to mention. You guys have
then
more?
Me and Keith need to talk about this child empress, because
go for it.
I still need to resolve this in my mind from my childhood. I had forgotten. I didn't forget. Gosh, I don't even know how to put it. I have had thoughts of that girl for like my whole life since seeing this movie. And when I was a kid, it was so hard for me to process not only what was going on, but also who she was and why she's screaming and crying, but also smiling, and why she's so beautiful yet so scary and horrifying to me. And like as soon as you walk in, I think the idea is that she's sick in some way. And so she's on a bed and she's sitting up in the bed. But the way that they have her dressed and the way that the set is designed, it almost looks like she's part of the bed, right? Like as a child, I remember thinking like where are her legs? Like what is happening here? She almost seemed like a little bit of a monster to me in a way. And the thing, so I mentioned at the end with the kids being chased, yes, but the real thing that was seared into my consciousness was that beautiful child crying and me feeling horrified about it. And I never in my life got that out of my mind for so long. Just like, oh, what is that? Oh man, that's like, it's something I want to put away, or I felt like I wanted to put away my whole life. And always that image would always like come back to me, just like, oh man, like it would just jump into my mind. And I just feel this almost like this foreboding about the whole thing. And I know it now, watching the scene again for the first time in so many years. I see exactly why. The juxtaposition of destruction, along with her shouting, just say a name, like just do it. and her crying, but then also her smiling and her being calm, but also her being gentle and showing love, but also her like being scared and all this stuff. Like there was so much range there for my little childhood heart. I couldn't handle it, right? And so but it made enough of an impression on me to where for my whole life I've actually always remembered that. I also didn't, when I was little, I didn't think she had any hair.
Yeah, it kind of looks like
she does.
It's tied back in a really tight ponytail.
Yeah,
but I also thought the same.
Like
I thought
a
her
dancer.
hair was short.
I mean,
like
a ballet dancer or something. Like that's kind of. But
yeah,
when I was little, I didn't notice the hair at all, so I just thought that she didn't have any hair. But that added to the strange beauty, but also the something's off about the whole situation, right? And I don't know. Gosh, I don't know exactly. And then all of a sudden, she's in the room with him, and like she's just like a person. And I never.
Do you know what's
understood
interesting about
my
this?
Whole life.
Now that you're kind of talking about how the look of the girl sort of like was part of affecting you in this way.
Seared into my consciousness.
Yeah, so I was watching some behind the scenes for the movie, and they tried so many different looks, like so many different hairstyles. Every day she was coming in, and they were doing extensions, and they were doing all these, those crazy 80s hairstyles, the big poofy stuff.
Oh my gosh. That would have been horrible.
They were trying veils, they were trying crowns, they were trying like all kinds of different looks. And this was the one they settled on. And of all the looks that I saw, I'm not sure that I got from the behind the scenes documentary why they picked this, but it certainly is by far the most like striking, unique look that they came up with. One that sticks with you.
This girl, she looks like almost like a baby. Like there's something about her, and maybe it was the fact that I couldn't tell if she had any hair, and her eyes are just ginormous, and like she looks like a baby, but also like an adult. Like she was so many things just packed up into one thing.
The perfect encapsulation of the what the title of the character is, the childlike Empress.
Yeah. The childlike Empress.
She's actually the oldest being in this world, but she also looks like a baby, like you're saying.
And she had so much wisdom, yet so much youth, and oh man.
Yeah, it's the unification of opposites, and there's a lot of symbolism here that I'm sure you can go into, Kason, but I kind of want to skip over that for homework or Max or whatever. But there's kind of like there's also
I'm sort skipping of like
the like almost like this bridal chamber kind of feel, like the unification bridal chamber, like all this kind of stuff. But it's a child, but it's a wise adult, all this kind of interesting stuff. But I want to get right to the thing, the scene, right, which is what you're talking about, because to me, I had this same very formative experience. For me, it wasn't terrifying. It was incredibly galvanizing, and it just is one of these things that like you, I think about it often in the moments when I need to dip into the well and to like motivate myself, because it is the crystallization, the shouting, imploring, alarming, direct imploration of the plot. Bastion, save us. Dream, right? Like crying, looking at you. And this, I hope I can do this justice, because this is like very important to me, right? This is the moment that I think, like, in my opinion, like I mentioned, this is like the first like truly transmedia like event or something like that the future of ARGs and stuff are maybe going to hopefully approximate in the future, where this is the payoff of all of that lensing that I talked about in the past, of priming you to put yourself in Bastion's shoes, who's putting himself in Atreyu's shoes, because they do a lot of interesting stuff with the camera work here, right? So first, it's Atreyu talking to the childlike Empress, right? When she's saying no, and it's very like mysterious, it's like, he doesn't realize he's already been part of the NeverEnding Story, just as he was sharing in your adventures. Others are sharing his. That's you, right? So this movie breaks the fourth wall in a way that no other thing ever does, because it's not just being cute. It's not just a joke. It's that literally your interiority, your imagination is literally part of this story. And here's where the moment happens. The moment that scarred you, Kason, in this way, is that she breaks the fourth wall and looks right at you and says, save us, you. right?
I couldn't handle it. I couldn't take it. That was way too much for me.
Too much pressure, dude.
I ran. I turned and ran.
Yeah, and every time I think of that scene or watch that scene, it's hard to describe because it makes me cry, but not out of sadness or happiness. The best thing that I can say is it's almost like literally like the resonant frequency of like a wine glass or something like that. It's like when she locks eyes with you, it like hits so hard. It's like I'm like literally like vibrating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my point is that is something that I always think of, like when the life is getting me down or I'm trying to do something to literally to bring the magic into the world and I'm getting depressed and it's not working out, like I think of the childlike empress telling me, you have to do it. You have to save us,
and it's simple. Just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like to me, again, hopefully I'm not being a little too emotional here, but like this scene, there's something unique and magical about that scene. Like right when she breaks the fourth wall and you can see the telescope go from Atreyu from Atreyu to Bastion to you, like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
And
that was so powerful, man. I've never seen it done that well in a movie ever.
I'll re-emphasize here again how incredible, like miraculous almost it is that this director pulled that performance out of that girl who had never acted before.
Yeah.
Like where she looks straight in the camera. Like it is so convincing. I have no idea how he did it. Like she's crying for real. And she sort of describes it in the behind the scenes too. She describes how the way that he went about like explaining the situation to her, like she felt legitimately scared, like, oh, the end of the world is happening almost. Like he like somehow instilled that feeling in her. And so it was like a genuine reaction she was having, right?
Wow.
So amazing job on his part for pulling that out of her. Amazing on her part for having the imagination to be able to like make that happen. But another thing that really struck me, you're talking about the lensing, right? So it's Atreyu talking to her, and then she's, calling out to Bastion, sort of like talking past Atreyu to him. And we're watching Bastion. And then so she's like looking straight at us, but then she also mentions that who else might be watching our story. It opens your imagination to go past you. So who's watching me? Who's watching my story?
It keeps going. Yeah.
And that is where the namesake of the story comes in, the never-ending story. Because that just keeps going forever. And that's the cyclical nature of the destruction of Fantastica or Fantasia, and then a new person picking it up and bringing it back, and then it goes back and forth, kind of like we're saying, almost Outer Wild style, right? And that's also a never-ending cycle. So
a book is a mirror. It's also like a seed.
Yeah.
It's something that can be planted and then blossom.
Yeah.
One other thing too. The name. When he opens the window and he finally says the name, right? I don't know what he said. Is there any canon about what he said?
I used to think that they were purposefully not telling you the name. It was like the storm was loud enough to where you weren't supposed to hear. But then you turn on the subtitles, and I think it's like Moon. It's not like a normal name. It's like Moon something. Moonchild. That's what it is.
Which it was his mother's name, I believe.
Was that his mother's real name though?
Well, it was 60s, 70s probably.
Okay,
it's like a hippie name or something. Moonchild. Yeah.
Oh, but this is one of those things. Waldorf school.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like a Berenstain Bears kind of situation, Mandela effect. Yeah. But like I could have, because I watched this movie a lot as a kid, and I could have swore, like you, Mike, that you do not hear it in the movie. But when I watched the movie now,
are the subtitles official?
Even without the subtitles, you can hear it now. But I'm pretty sure that like when it first came out, you couldn't hear it. So like I don't know if something got like edited in there or something.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be interesting.
But I used to think that they were, as an artistic choice, sort of like purposefully not allowing you to be able to decipher like what the name actually is. But it is supposed to be, audibly Moonchild is what he's saying there. So there's a couple of really good comments here from Jonas Cynic over on the Patreon chat here. I've got a quote here. Evangelion's plot became more introspective as the series progressed, despite being broadcast in a children's television time slot. Anno, who's the creator of it, Anno, felt that people should be exposed to the realities of life at a young age, or at as young an age as possible.
Yes.
I totally agree with this sentiment. I totally agree with it. I think it's super important. He goes on for a second comment here. Is fantasy limited to the confines of imagination? Would you call it a powerless creation? More than wishful thinking, more than fiction, something capable of affecting the realities beyond its bounds. If fantasy is born from hope, a desire to make the world better than it is, then that hope can be made manifest. Thus does change come, and thus is fantasy forged into a new reality. This is from the new game, Metaphor Refantasio, which is like coming out soon from Atlas.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. You know, you take that idea far enough and you basically get into theology.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
And again, to call back to Xenosaga and the thing that I thought was the theme there, which is, single thought can change the world for exactly
a seed. Everything's a seed. We live in a world full of 1 billion seeds, and one of them, or many of them, are going to blossom and really shape the world in a beautiful way.
We got one more here. This is from Chronicles of Narnia. Listen, Peter, when Aslan said you could never go back to Narnia, he meant that the Narnia you were thinking of, but that was not the real Narnia. That had a beginning and an end. It was only a shadow or a copy of the real Narnia, which has always been here and will always be here, just as our own world, England and all, is only a shadow or a copy of something in Aslan's real world. And of course, it is different as a thing is from a shadow, or a waking life is from a dream. It's all in Plato. All in Plato. Bless me. What do they teach them at these schools?
I just read that book to my kids and read that exact line as well.
That's amazing.
Once again, just like what I said before, you take that idea far enough, you get into theology. That's there we are. This is where we are. But also, this goes into J.R.R. Tolkien's idea of sub-creation as well, that he outlines on fairy stories. That it's all part of this. It's many worlds, but it's all part of the same one world.
Yeah. Well, fellas.
Okay, one sec. I have one more. Well, I don't even know. This whole story also follows in certain ways, maybe that will outline in other videos, because I find this absolutely fascinating. This whole story follows ancient initiation temple rituals from like Egypt and Babylon and even China and Japan and even in the Americas and Greece and all over. The way that things work, the way that the character goes, the way that he gets gifts and then has to be tested and pass through certain places to get to a certain other place, and the way that it ends with the seed and with the seed in between, something like in the bridal chamber and a marriage and a new world kind of afterwards. This movie has all of that, the way many movies do, I've noticed lately, as well as books. But this is something I've also noticed in other movies as well, and it's something I will likely be making a video about very soon, because it's utterly fascinating. But this movie, it's all there in this movie as well.
Yeah. Keith, you got anything else that we had missed?
No, just find a way to do what you dream. There you go. Just like the childlike empress says.
Yeah.
The nothing is out there. It will be relentless.
Yep.
But every human soul, every human heart has the power to regenerate the world. And I really believe that. So if ever you're down and you're out there and you're alone, or you feel alone, know that there's an infinite universe out there of resonant beings that are with you and trying to regenerate the world every day.
Yeah. Love that.
I love that.
We've talked a lot about synchronicity in the past on our podcast. And I don't know if there's something to it or not. It almost doesn't matter, because it feels like there is, and that's what's important. But this movie kind of hit me kind of at this really, really synchronicitous, if that's a word, time.
Synchronous?
Synchronous time. where I really did sort of, and I'm not usually a person who settles easily, right? I'm not usually a person who gives up on stuff. I kind of pursue it. And I don't give up until I accomplish what I want to do. But it was almost like I was lured into it in a way that I didn't expect. Sort of lured into this place of settling over the last, I'd say, probably 2 years. And this, alongside a couple of other things, have felt like a wake-up call to like get back on the horse, so to speak, and get back out there and keep pursuing what it is that I actually wanted to do with my life. And so I'm feeling some big inspiration to do that. I think there's some really big things to come that you can expect here on the channel here in the near future. Kaysen and I have been talking about it behind the scenes, and I think there's some really, really, really cool stuff coming, and we're really excited about it. So look forward to that. Can't really reveal anything just yet. It's still kind of in the beginning phases, but I'm very excited about where things are going. And so I just want to thank everyone who supports the channel. Thank you to our patrons, to our YouTube members, to our subscribe stars, to everybody who has made this possible. We've been doing this now for, almost 4 years. And it feels crazy that that's true. We've been doing this like storytelling analysis version of the podcast. We've been doing YouTube much longer than that, but it has been a life-changing experience. And I've said this many times. I can't reiterate it enough, but it's because of you who support the show that we have been able to do it as long as we have, and that we're going to be continue to be able to do it and expand it in the future. And you guys have, in a very real sense, changed my life, and I just want to thank you all for that. So hopefully you enjoyed our analysis of NeverEnding Story. Keith, thanks for coming on again. It's always awesome to talk to you. And
absolutely, thank you for involving me in this wonderful show.
Yeah. Kaysen?
Very good. I just had the last thing to say that I didn't, because I lost my train of thought. The girl, 30 years later, I finally resolved my image. I finally resolved that awful image of her in a way that I am no longer afraid.
Good. So, that's great.
I'm good. I'm glad we were able to watch this movie. Thanks for everybody who voted for it.
So I have
I can be at peace now. I can sleep peacefully.
I have 2 questions for you, and then we'll leave off. First of all, how often do you think you will watch this now yourself? Do you think you'll regularly revisit?
Yeah, I want to show this to my kids.
And that was my second
because I was iffy on that. I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to show my kids this one. Now, after watching it, immediately after it was over, I was like, my kids have to see this movie.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. The symbolism, the archetypes, like the storytelling, the beauty, the wonder, it's all there in such rich detail. I've got to show it to my kids.
Yeah. So when is that happening, do you think?
What?
When is that happening?
I don't see. We don't watch a ton of movies. Probably this weekend. I mean, it'll probably be the next movie we watch.
Nice.
I'm going to say, hey kids, but here's the thing. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I'm going to see if I can watch this just with my 7-year-old and 5-year-old.
I mean,
we'll see.
There's even a part of me, even though we just talked about the fact that kids need to be accustomed to sad things,
but as early as possible, and what's possible.
There's still a part of me, even for your oldest, that just like feels terrified for the Artex sinking scene. Like, that's gonna be tough, dude.
She may not want to watch it after this, but if my kids have a reaction like me, which is that movie's not for me, I will be able to step in maybe a year or 2 later and be like, hey, let's try it again.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're ready, let's be brave. Let's watch this movie. It'll be helpful to you, in your life. I really believe that this movie will help people through their lives.
That's exactly what it does. That's why it's such a timeless classic. Yeah.
I've literally recommended this movie to adults who haven't seen this before. Like, when they tell me something they're going through with their life, I'm like, I think you should watch this movie. Yeah.
It helps you confront death. We didn't even talk much about his mother, but that's a whole subplot that's overshadowing the whole thing, and the new name, and it's not the new name, it's just, the mother's name, but the new name for the story, and the fact that he is confronting death in this way, and just so, I don't know, it's powerful. I think it's very important for my kids to watch.
Yeah. beautiful film that every time I see, I appreciate more, and I feel like I get more out of.
Me too, all 2 times. This movie is encroaching on top 10 for me right now, and it was bottom half before this. So, like, I don't know how many movies it jumped, but it jumped hundreds in one.
It's scaled Everest in a single bound.
In a single bound. After sitting at the bottom for 30 years, it just skyrocketed up.
That's amazing. Well, guys, thanks for watching. We're going to go now. But again, we appreciate you, and we'll see you again next month. Peace out.
Bye.